If you don't want to leave me alone in this world, follow the channel, because in the next story, I may choose you.
Leora adjusted the controls of her pod with a flourish that was mostly for show. In reality, she had no idea which button did what, and she hoped the pod's AI didn't mind improvisation. She hummed a tune from some human show she'd watched once, one that ended in a terrifying cliffhanger, which she now realized was oddly appropriate. Somewhere in the narrow canyon of fluorescent rock ahead, a small human boy was curled up like a lost action figure, knees tucked to his chest, eyes wide and blinking too fast. Leora's ears twitched, a subtle warning signal that something was off, but she ignored it. After all, humans were notoriously dramatic. Probably he had just stubbed his toe on a rock and decided to sit there in existential panic. "Hello there," she said, attempting cheerfulness and failing spectacularly as her voice wobbled somewhere between a songbird and a foghorn. The boy flinched, which Leora misread as surprise, and she grinned awkwardly. Her long ears swayed lazily as she extended a hand, making a mental note to stop comparing them to antennae in front of humans. They were self-conscious about that sort of thing. "I'm Leora. Are you lost or just practicing for a staring contest?" The boy blinked. I think lost." His voice was small, like it had been folded and pressed under a heavy rock. Leora winced. He sounded fragile, like a porcelain teacup that had been dropped one too many times. She could have left him there, surely, but then what would she tell her friends in the intergalactic cafe? "Hey, look, I abandoned a human in a canyon today," didn't exactly read as heroic. She sighed, her ears drooping dramatically, which probably looked suspiciously like a sneeze. "Hop in, pod now, very safe, probably." As the boy stumbled into the pod, Leora muttered under her breath about safety protocols being wildly overrated. She handed him a helmet with the kind of optimism that suggested it might explode at any moment. "This goes over your head, not inside your head. That would be messy," she explained, half joking, half panicked. The boy managed a nervous smile, and she felt a pang of empathy that was immediately complicated by the strange hum of the pod's engines. Something was wrong, subtle at first, like a mosquito with a degree in chaos theory. The pod lifted off, wobbling like a caffeinated jellyfish, and Leora made a comment about gravity's sense of humor. The boy laughed nervously. She decided that laughter was a sign of life, which was important because she had a vague memory of a story where people didn't survive laughter. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she filed away that this human boy might have a mother who could, and probably would, obliterate them both. That, however, was too abstract for her to deal with now. Instead, she engaged in a running commentary about the canyon, claiming that some of the fluorescent rocks were actually sentient and judging their life choices, though she may have made that part up. The boy seemed to enjoy the absurdity, which made Leora feel just slightly less like a fool. They barely cleared the canyon when the first subtle warning appeared. The air vibrated, a strange, almost musical warble that Leora's long ears picked up instinctively. She pretended to scratch her head, whispering, "Probably just a worm with stage fright." The boy looked alarmed. "A worm?" Leora nodded sagely, which did nothing to explain the incoming shadows racing along their trajectory. Missiles, tiny and glittering like shooting stars, streaked toward the pod, and she swore violently in 3 languages, one of which was entirely fictional. "Well, that's rude," she muttered, ducking instinctively. The boy clutched his seat strap, muttering something about Mom. Leora's sense of humor tried to compensate for her rising panic. "Ah, mothers, they have a way of turning your life into an action movie without your consent, don't they?" The boy didn't answer, which she interpreted as either deep thought or the universal human equivalent of fainting. She flipped switches, pulled levers, and yelled at the pod as if it could respond with moral support. Miraculously, it complied, ducking and weaving through the incoming fire with a grace that made her look like a genius pilot, which she absolutely was not. The boy laughed nervously again, and Leora decided that if they survived, she might just write a book called How Not to Die While Rescuing Humans. A comedy. Their conversation was interrupted by the pod's AI announcing that fuel levels were low, and that they might soon encounter gravitational turbulence that could turn them into cosmic pancake. Leora waved dismissively at the warning. "Fuel, Shmuel, we're professionals, probably." The boy's eyes widened. "Professionals?" he asked. Leora winked, causing her ears to sweep dramatically across the cabin. "Professional-ish, kind of. Mostly in spirit." They passed through the first checkpoint of the star lanes, which was essentially a bureaucratic space toll gate run by semi-sentient drones that enjoyed asking riddles before letting travelers pass. Leora attempted to answer one using interpretive dance, which somehow worked, though she refused to discuss it later. By the time they reached the edge of the next system, Leora realized something important. Helping this boy was not going to be a simple matter of transportation and bad jokes. Somewhere out there, his mother existed, and she was not a mother in the sentimental, bakes cookies and gives hugs sense. No, she was a mother in the obliterates everything you love with surgical precision sense. Leora's ears twitched at the faintest vibrations, detecting a presence closing in faster than a starship could blink. She glanced at the boy who now held her hand tightly. "Okay," she said, voice trembling but still trying to sound cheerful. "We might have just signed up for intergalactic hide-and-seek with murder. But I promise, I'm funny enough to keep us alive, probably." And with that, the pod shot forward, weaving through stars, asteroids, and poorly thought-out metaphors, while Leora's humor became their lifeline, a fragile thread holding off terror as the first shadow of the mother stretched across the void. The pod rattled as it dove through a nebula that smelled, somehow, like burnt marshmallows. Leora coughed, flicking switches that she hoped were important, and muttered, "Space cooking, not as fun as it sounds." The boy clung to the console, eyes wide, clearly debating whether he should scream or just pretend he was part of the scenery. Leora waved a hand at him. "Relax. Nebulas are mostly harmless, unless you get stuck in one and it sings at you in 3 octaves, which luckily happens only once a decade." She pointed dramatically at a cloud of violet gas that pulsed with faint lightning. "See. Totally harmless." The cloud glowed back, which she interpreted as a polite nod or maybe a sarcastic wink. Her ears twitched constantly, picking up the faint hum of something following them, a presence that made the hair on her arms stand up like miniature alarm bells. "That's probably just the universe applauding our bravery," she said, though her voice had a tremor. The boy shivered. "Mom," he said softly, and Leora frowned. "Right, the mom thing. Yeah, she's efficient like a blender on steroids." The boy looked horrified. Leora tried to smile. "Don't worry, I've never met anyone who could intimidate me more than a vending machine that eats coins, and that's saying something." They passed through an asteroid belt that seemed intent on auditioning for a role as a cosmic pinball machine. Leora dodged and weaved, quipping, "Okay, rocks, I see you, but I'm faster than your average space tumbleweed." One particularly ambitious boulder bounced off the pod, shaking it like a snow globe. "Not my finest hour," Leora admitted. The boy laughed nervously, which was better than screaming, and that was enough for Leora to count as a minor victory. She glanced at the console and noticed a blinking warning, gravitational fluctuations approaching critical. "Ah, gravity," she sighed. "The only thing in the universe that never gives me a straight answer. Seriously, it's like it's making a cosmic joke." The first probe from the mother appeared like a flicker of shadow in the periphery. Leora squinted at it, her ears flattening instinctively. "Oh great," she muttered. "She's sending the greeting cards early." The probe zipped past them, leaving a trail of shimmering energy that smelled faintly of burnt toast. "I think she's trying to say hello," she said, attempting lightheartedness. The boy, gripping her sleeve, whispered, "She'll kill us." Leora laughed a bit too loudly. "Yes, and then she'll offer us tea. Intergalactic moms are unpredictable like that." The boy did not laugh. Leora sighed. "Fine. Terrifyingly precise assassins are less amusing than I thought." They ducked into a nearby moon's orbit to hide, hoping the mother's probes would lose them in the planet's magnetosphere. Leora fiddled with the pod's camouflage, muttering to herself, "If this works, we're invisible. If it doesn't, well, let's not think about it." The pod shimmered, fading into a faint outline, but the hum of danger remained. The boy peeked out from under the dashboard. "Will she find us?" he asked. Leora gave a shrug that might have been heroic or entirely accidental. "Probably, but that's half the fun. Besides, I have a plan that involves me yelling confusing instructions at her while you hide under my chair. It's brilliant in theory." The boy hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod, as though agreeing that logic had no place in their lives right now. A sudden jolt shook the pod, and the mother's second wave arrived, a sleek ship that moved like liquid metal, reflecting stars in its surface with unnerving precision. Leora's ears twitched, scanning the frequencies of its approach. "Well, that's rude," she muttered. "They didn't even knock." The boy flinched. Leora patted his shoulder awkwardly. "Don't worry, we're professionals-ish, remember? Mostly-ish. We improvise like jazz musicians with lasers." She flipped a switch that released a cloud of holographic decoys, each one shaped like her pod, each one waving cheerfully. The mother's ship zipped around, analyzing the duplicates, while Leora muttered, "Nothing says stay away like an army of sarcastic holograms." The boy laughed for the first time genuinely, and Leora felt a tiny victory in the chaos. They warped through a narrow space tunnel, dodging gravitational turbulence like dancers on a cosmic stage. Leora narrated their progress. Step left, dodge asteroid, wink at the passing comet, and oh, that was a wormhole, not a big deal, just a slight tear in the fabric of space. No one panic. The boy clutched the edge of his seat, laughter and terror mixed in equal measures. Leora's ears twitched in amusement. She could almost hear the universe giggling at them. But even as humor carried them, she sensed the mother closing in. Every pulse of energy, every flicker in the pod's sensors was a reminder that the stakes were real. She glanced at the boy, whose hand was still clinging to hers. "You know," she said, "I didn't sign up for babysitting human boys with homicidal parents, but somehow I've ended up a legend in my own lunch break." The boy smiled weakly. "You really are funny." Leora grinned. "I try. Humor is survival out here, trust me, or maybe it's just my coping mechanism." As they neared a cluster of magnetic asteroids, Leora realized that escape was going to require more than jokes and improvised maneuvers. The mother was clever, relentless, and terrifyingly efficient. Still, Leora's long ears twitched with determination. If they were going to survive, she would have to outsmart a human's deadliest protector with a combination of luck, absurdity, and an alarming amount of improvisation. And maybe, just maybe, she could keep the boy alive long enough for him to see that intergalactic babysitters sometimes came with an unhealthy sense of humor, and ears that moved when you least expected it. The pod shuddered violently as the mother's ship finally dropped from hyperspace, a sleek metallic predator that moved with terrifying elegance. Leora gripped the console, her long ears flattening in concentration. "Well," she muttered, "we're officially invited to the most unpleasant tea party in the galaxy." The boy clutched her arm wide-eyed. She's going to kill us," he whispered. Leora tried to smile. "She might try, yes. But I like to think of it as extreme motivation." The mother's voice came through the comms, smooth and cold. "Return the boy, Leora, or suffer consequences you will regret." Leora's fingers danced over the controls, flipping switches at random and muttering, "Consequences, schmequences, we're professionals-ish." The boy giggled nervously. "Professionals-ish?" he asked, and Leora winked. "Mostly-ish. Survival's an art form." The chase began. The pod dove through a field of spinning magnetic asteroids, dodging blasts of energy from the mother's ship. Leora's mind raced as fast as the pod, plotting, improvising, and cracking jokes like bullets. "If I survive this, I'm writing a survival guide," she said, pulling a lever. Chapter 1, Never Underestimate Humans or Their Terrifyingly Punctual Parents. The boy laughed, his fear mingling with the thrill of the ride, which somehow gave Leora a surge of courage. She flipped another switch and released a swarm of holographic decoys, each pod waving cheerfully at the mother's sensors. "Look at them, cute little distractions. They remind me of my ex's attempts at charm, adorable but ultimately useless," she quipped. The mother's ship swerved, scanning the decoys, giving Leora a tiny window. "Now!" she yelled. She activated the pod's experimental hyperjump engine, a reckless idea she had been tinkering with for years but never tested. The pod blurred into a streak of light, and the mother's ship faltered, its targeting momentarily scrambled. When they rematerialized in a quieter section of space, Leora exhaled, her ears twitching in relief. "We made it mostly in one piece," she said, turning to the boy. He grinned, a genuine spark of joy in his eyes. "You saved me." Leora laughed softly. "We saved each other, I think. That's what this kind of adventure does. It's mutual heroism with a side of chaos." But the mother wasn't finished. Her ship reappeared from behind a nebula, silent and menacing. Leora took a deep breath. "All right, final act," she muttered. She engaged the pod's stealth matrix, weaving through the nebula like a shadow. "Mom's great at precision," she said to the boy, but she didn't account for creativity. Using a series of rapid maneuvers and decoy holograms, she lured the mother's ship into a gravitational trap, a pocket of space where physics behaved unpredictably. The mother's ship struggled against the currents, her attacks becoming sloppy. Finally, Leora transmitted a message. "Listen," she said, "I respect you, terrifying, lethal, impressive, but I also have something you don't. Improvisation and questionable humor. Let's make this simple. Let the boy go, and I promise he gets home safely. Resist, and well, you'll meet a space rock, and they're mean. The mother paused, her ship hovering in the swirling gravity. There was a tense silence, broken only by the faint beeping of Leora's console. Then, slowly, the mother's ship backed away, retreating through the nebula. Leora exhaled in relief, her ears finally relaxing. "That went better than expected," she said, offering the boy a grin. "Mostly because humor is a weapon, who knew?" They set a course for a human settlement, and along the way, Leora realized how much she had changed. She had always believed kindness was simple. Hand someone help, smile, move on. But helping the boy had taught her that kindness could be dangerous, complicated, and chaotic, and still worth it. She glanced at him, and he looked back with gratitude and newfound confidence. "You're brave," he said softly. Leora twitched her ears, slightly embarrassed. "Brave-ish," she corrected. "Mostly-ish, but thanks." When they finally landed, safe and unchased, the boy bounded out of the pod, turning to wave. "I'll never forget this." Leora waved back, her ears flicking in amusement. She watched him run toward the settlement, a small figure full of hope, and she realized that the journey had changed her too. She had faced terror, improvised miracles, and survived with humor as her ally. The pod hummed quietly as she prepared to take off again, a grin on her face. Space was wide, dangerous, and utterly ridiculous, and she would never stop exploring it, one improbable rescue at a time. And somewhere far behind, the mother watched, silent, but perhaps reconsidering the effectiveness of lethal efficiency when faced with chaos and humor. Leora's ears twitched in satisfaction. Adventure, it seemed, was never truly over.